Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. I grew up hearing stories about our family's land like it was some kind of secret world tucked away from everything else. 100 acres of woods, rocky hills, thick brush, and a narrow river that cut straight through it like a cold vein. The hunting cabin sat right in the middle, far from the road, far from any neighbors, and far from anything else except wildlife. We had a heavy I-beam gate at the start of the trail, welded by my uncle, chained and locked, the kind of thing that would stop a truck dead if someone rammed it. Only family had the code or a key. The place was as isolated as you could get without a helicopter. I'd been there 100 times, mostly during hunting season or random weekends when the weather felt good enough. The cabin wasn't fancy. No power except a generator when we needed it, no running water except what we hauled in, and no cell service at all. It had that old wood smell that never left, mixed with the faint scent of gun oil from the rack near the front door. It felt safe in the same way that old habits feel safe. You just grow used to them. That weekend I was up there with one of my cousins. It wasn't a big trip or anything special. Just a couple nights away from everything. We drove in late that Friday, unlocked the gate, rolled up the rutted trail, crossed the little wooden bridge over the river, and parked behind the cabin. The woods were loud with crickets and frogs, and the soft bubbling of the river. That sound never stopped out there. It was like the whole property breathed in its own rhythm. By Saturday night, things were normal. We'd had a small fire earlier, nothing crazy, just enough to keep the bugs away. We cooked canned chili and drank a few beers. Inside the cabin, we played cribbage at the old wobbly table with the oil lantern lit between us. Music from a Bluetooth speaker echoed quietly, the kind of noise you don't worry about because no one can hear you for miles. The air outside had that heavy late night stillness, and the temperature had dropped just enough that the cabin felt comfortable. It was around midnight when we started slowing down. The cards were scattered, the beers were mostly empty, and that tired heaviness was settling in. I remember reaching over to turn down the lantern a little when the entire cabin suddenly shook with a sound so violent it felt unreal at first. A single deep slam hit the back door. Whum! It wasn't like someone knocking. It wasn't like an animal brushing against the wall. It was the kind of hit that pushes air through the room, the kind that rattles glass in a way you feel in your chest. I froze, not even processing it, but before I could react the second hit came. Wham! The metal door flexed inward. The windows trembled. The table even vibrated. It felt like something was trying to break the door clean off its frame. The lantern shook enough that its flame flickered hard to one side. Then a third hit came, even deeper, almost hollow, like something heavy had swung full force into it. Whum! And then nothing. Not a sound. Not from outside, not from inside, not from the woods. Everything cut off like someone had flipped a switch. The frogs that had been screaming all evening were gone. The crickets vanished. Even the river sounded distant. The silence felt thick, like it had weight to it. I didn't move. My cousin shut off the music so fast the table shook again after his hand hit it. We didn't speak. We didn't even breathe right. We just stared toward the back door like our bodies refused to look anywhere else. The lantern hissed softly, the only sound left. I remember my mouth feeling dry, like my throat had closed up. For a few seconds, or maybe it was longer, nothing happened at all. No footsteps, no breathing, no dragging, no running. Just stillness. Eventually, the woods started to come back, but not all at once. A single cricket started up somewhere deep in the trees. Then another. Then the low hum of everything began to return, until the forest sounded normal again, almost like whatever had been there had moved out of that invisible radius. The kind of return that felt staged, like the woods waited until they were sure we weren't moving before they relaxed. After a long stretch of sitting still, we finally worked up the nerve to stand. Even that felt impossible at first. When we got to the windows, we kept the lantern low so the glare wouldn't block our view. I looked out into the dark, but all I saw were trees and black space between them. The flashlight beam cut through the yard, but didn't reveal anything except branches and brush, and the wet glint of the river through the trees. My cousin said he saw eyes for a second, a reflection low to the ground, but I didn't catch it. We checked every door and window 3 times. Then we checked them again. Everything was locked, but the back door had a slight bow to it now, a curve inward that hadn't been there before. The metal looked wrong, like it had been flexed too hard. I didn't want to touch it. We didn't go downstairs after that. We climbed up into the loft, shut off the lantern, and sat in the darkness with only a pocket knife between us. There were larger guns downstairs, but neither of us was willing to climb down that ladder again. The loft window looked over the front yard, which felt safer. We sat with our backs against the wall and waited. Every tiny sound snapped my nerves. Every groan of the cabin felt like footsteps outside. I didn't sleep at all. My cousin didn't either. The night dragged so slowly that it felt like time refused to move. By the time the first faint gray light showed through the trees, my body felt wired and exhausted at the same time. When we climbed down and opened the back door, cold air hit us, and I finally saw the damage in daylight. The metal door had a deep dent, a solid, rounded impression like something heavy and blunt had struck it straight on. The door jamb had cracks running through it, and the wood around the screws had started to split. You could see where the frame had flexed. Something strong had hit it, and it hadn't tapped. It had tried to get in. We walked the yard, checking the mud and the brush around the cabin, but there were no clear tracks. The ground was hard from the dry weather, and the leaves made everything look disturbed even when it wasn't. We looked for fur, claw marks, boot prints, anything. Nothing matched the force we'd felt. By the time we locked up and drove out, daylight felt like some kind of thin shield, a weak comfort that didn't explain anything. The I-beam gate was still locked when we reached it. No signs of tampering. The road in looked normal. No tire marks or cleared paths through the brush. Even now, thinking back on it, I can't line it up with anything familiar. A bear wouldn't hit a door like that. Not 3 times in perfect, even blows. A person wouldn't be able to leave without tracks. And no one should have known how to get through the gate, or even where the cabin was. The sound was too heavy for a person anyway. Too controlled for an animal. Too deliberate for some random accident out in the dark. All I know is something came right up to the back door of an off-grid cabin in the center of 100 acres. Something strong enough to dent steel and shake the walls. Something that hit like it wanted inside, and then stood in silence so complete that the whole forest went still with it. We never figured it out. We replaced the door and jamb, reinforced the frame, even added another bar across it. But whenever I think about that night, the 3 hits, the sudden silence, the way the woods paused like they were holding their breath, I feel that same cold rush down my spine. Because whatever stood outside that night wasn't guessing or wandering. It knew exactly where we were. I was sitting on the old wooden dock behind the cabin, the one that always dipped a little too low on the left side because of the warped planks, sorting through my tackle box like I had done 100 times before. It was late afternoon, the kind of quiet time when the lake looked flat and dark, almost metallic, and the only sounds were the small clicks of my lures shifting around and the slow, steady breathing of my dog lying beside me. The sun was dropping behind the tree line, not fully gone yet, but low enough that the shadows across the water had started to stretch long and cold. I remember feeling calm in that very specific way you only get out there. No engines, no people, no distant hum of anything human. just the soft lapping of water under the dock and the faint smell of wet wood mixed with old fish bait. I was focused on reorganizing the smaller hooks and sinkers, trying to get them sorted into their tiny slots, so they didn't spill everywhere like they usually did. I had been crouched over the box for a while, hands cold from the metal pieces, thinking about what lure I'd use the next morning. My dog was on my left, stretched out in her usual half-sleep. She was always alert even when she looked relaxed, ears twitching at every little sound. But she didn't bark unless something was actually worth barking at. Most of the time she'd only lift her head when a squirrel ran down the bank, or when a car crackled over the gravel road far away on the other side of the property. She chased everything that moved. Deer, raccoons, even leaves rolling across the dirt when the wind got strong. That dog didn't hesitate for anything. That's why the sound she made caught me off guard so deeply. It wasn't a normal bark. It wasn't even a quick warning growl, or that sharp huff she'd give when she heard footsteps on the path. This was low and steady at first, the kind of growl that vibrated more than it sounded. Before my brain even caught up, her body was already stiff. Her tail didn't move. Her ears were straight up, completely locked in one direction, directly across the lakefront, toward the darkest part of the tree line in front of us. I froze halfway through reaching for another lure. At first I thought she had spotted a deer, but her growl told me it wasn't that. I had lived out there long enough to know how she reacted to everything. A deer made her excited. A raccoon made her irritated. A stranger's footsteps made her defensive. But this was something else entirely. Then she barked, loud, deep, and sharp, like she was trying to scare something off but didn't dare move toward it. She didn't take a single step forward. This dog would chase a full, grown black bear through the trees if it surprised her enough, and she didn't even twitch toward the woods this time. She stood her ground and barked like something was inches from us, and every hair on her back was straight up. That bark hit a part of my brain that I didn't even know existed. It was pure warning, the kind that doesn't need translation. I didn't even lift my head to look. I didn't want to. I felt it in my stomach first. A sudden heavy drop, like falling on ice. The air seemed to change too, the way it sometimes does right before a storm, except there was no storm. It was dead quiet. Not a single bird, not a branch, nothing. Just her barking and growling like she was facing down something huge. I could hear something moving in the tree line. Slow, steady steps. Not light. Not clumsy either. Something with weight behind it. You know how you can always tell the difference between a squirrel bouncing over dry leaves and something bigger moving with purpose. This was slow and controlled but heavy enough that the ground under the leaves made a deep, soft shifting sound. One step at a time. Not rushing, not backing off, just approaching. My body reacted long before my head did. I didn't think at all. I grabbed my dog's collar with one hand, scooped up my tackle box with the other, and bolted toward the cabin without even bothering to close the lid. Hooks and beads rattled around inside, clicking against each other as I ran. My dog didn't resist. Usually she'd pull forward if something scared her, but this time she stayed right next to me, pressed in close, still growling, still looking behind us even while we ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Something in me knew that if I turned my head, even for a second, I'd see something I didn't want burned into my mind. My legs were shaking by the time I reached the porch. The cabin door was already half open from earlier, and I pushed it the rest of the way and slammed it shut behind us, twisting the old deadbolt as fast as I could. It felt loose the way it always had, and for a second I wondered if it would even matter if something wanted in badly enough. My dog stayed pressed against the door, still staring at the window beside it, growling through her teeth. She didn't pace or whine. She stood still, ears forward, her whole body taut. It took me a while to realize I was shaking almost as much as she was. Inside the cabin it was quiet, but not in the peaceful way the outdoors had been earlier. It was the wrong kind of quiet. Thick, heavy. The kind where you feel like sound is hiding rather than missing. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, and every small creak of the wood seemed louder than it should have been. Whatever had been in the tree line didn't follow us to the porch. I didn't hear anything walking around the cabin. No scratching, no breathing, no snapping branches, just silence settling back in, slow and uneasy. After a few minutes, my dog's growl faded, but she stayed at the door for a long time, sniffing and listening like she was waiting for the sound of footsteps to start again. I kept trying to make myself believe it was just a black bear. We had tons of them around the property. They wandered through all the time and usually didn't care about us. I had seen them climb the same trees my dog barked at. I had watched them flip over logs looking for bugs, walk across the back trail, even nap in the tall weeds one summer. But I had never heard a bear move like that, and my dog had never reacted to one like she did that day. She chased them all the time, stupid, fearless animal, but not that day. That day she acted like something had stepped out of the woods that she didn't want any part of. I stayed inside for the rest of the day, only stepping away from the window long enough to light the small propane lamp on the kitchen counter. I didn't go back out until the next morning when the sunlight was strong and bright. Even then I walked slow, checking every corner of the yard, scanning the tree line for anything out of place. There were no tracks in the mud, nothing broken, nothing disturbed. The forest looked as normal as it always did, calm, clean, and empty. It almost felt insulting how normal it looked. But I knew what I heard, and I knew how my dog reacted. That moment still sits with me. The quiet lake, the simple task I was doing, the instant shift from total calm to pure fear. It stuck hard because it didn't make sense, and because I never saw what caused it. That's the part that comes back to me the most when I think about that day. The not knowing. The way I kept my eyes down and just ran, because every instinct I had told me that looking up would be a mistake. Maybe it really was just a big black bear wandering close. Maybe the silence of that afternoon just made everything feel worse. The forest can play tricks on your nerves when it's too quiet. But I've been around wildlife my whole life, and I've been startled more times than I can count. Nothing ever hit me the way that moment did. Nothing ever made my dog stand her ground the way she did without moving forward. Whatever was in those trees wasn't something she wanted to challenge, and that alone was enough for me. I never figured out what it was, and honestly, I'm fine with that. Sometimes not knowing is what keeps you safe. That day taught me that even in a place you think you understand completely, even in the calmest moments, something can shift everything in a heartbeat. Something can step out of the quiet and remind you how small and unprepared you really are. I never heard those same footsteps again, and I never saw anything unusual after that day. But every time I go back to that cabin, I find myself glancing at that same patch of tree line without meaning to, remembering how fast that dread hit me. And even now, years later, I'm still glad I didn't look up. I moved to Seattle from Kansas about 5 years ago, and even though I joke about being one of the tech bros who ruined the city, the truth is that I came here because I loved the landscape. Back home, everything felt flat and predictable. Out here, the mountains rise out of nowhere, dark and sharp and always half hidden by clouds. I spent most of my free time finding new trails or new cabins, or new little stretches of river, where the sound of water drowned out everything else in my life. So when I found a mid-week cabin deal on the Skycomish River, early fall, quiet season, I booked it without thinking twice. I got there around 10 in the morning. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath, and the trees were dripping from the overnight rain. The cabin sat maybe 30 yards from the river, which churned fast and loud, carrying leaves and small bits of wood downstream. The place looked nicer than I expected. A big back deck, hot tub, huge glass windows facing the water. Not exactly roughing it, but that was the point. I wanted quiet, not hardship. I dropped my bag on the bed, kicked off my shoes and started exploring. Inside, everything had a very lived-in feeling, not dirty, just used. Magazines from 2018 stacked on the coffee table. A shelf packed with DVDs, mostly romantic comedies, a few kids' titles and one random workout DVD. Wooden floors creaked under my steps, and every corner smelled faintly of cedar and old wood smoke. In the bedroom, tucked into a little recessed nook, I noticed a woven basket filled with notebooks and a couple of outdated travel guides. The notebooks were labeled West Notes. I grabbed the top one, flopped down on the bed, and opened it. I expected the usual stuff. Families talking about how their kids loved skipping stones, or couples raving about the hot tub. And yeah, most of it was exactly that. Pages and pages of people thanking the owners, describing the deer they saw, the barbecue they made, the way the river sounded at night. I skimmed until I reached the last few entries. That's when things changed. The most recent pages were written by someone who clearly wanted to entertain themselves, or maybe scare the next guest. It started with a date, October 10th, 2020, and went on about noises outside, something about a book they found, and some rhyme about all goo-goo. It was ridiculous. Creepy drawings, vague threats, eerie descriptions. I could feel the writer trying a little too hard, but I had to admit it was entertaining in a weird, out-of-place way. Still, as I read, I started noticing the windows around me getting darker by the minute. The sun was low, clouds rolling in fast. The glass reflected the bedroom behind me more than the outside. For a second it did give me the feeling that someone could be standing out there in the tree line, watching. I got up and closed the curtains. Not because I believed any of it, but because having them open made the room feel too exposed. I sat back down and kept reading. The entries got more frantic. The handwriting grew sloppy and distorted. Mentions of chanting, glowing lights, not trusting the husband anymore. It all screamed Halloween prank, or bored couple trying to freak each other out. But the last pages were messy in a way that didn't look like a joke. Strange spelling. Water-warped ink. The name, Joe, written over and over until the page was covered in overlapping letters. That part made the hair on the back of my neck lift, but more in a someone took this joke way too seriously way. I snapped the book shut and tossed it back in the basket. I dug around, looking for something actually useful. Maybe a local guide to trails I hadn't done yet. That's when I saw another book at the bottom of the basket. A small leather one, wedged under the travel guides. I didn't remember seeing it when I first started flipping around in there. I pulled it out. The cover was dark brown, almost black, and it felt damp. Not just cold, not just old damp. I pressed my thumb into the leather and little droplets beaded up on the surface like it had been out in the rain minutes ago. My stomach tightened in a weird way. I kept reminding myself that whoever wrote those guestbook entries was probably the same person who stuck this in here to freak people out. But the wetness felt too real, too fresh. I wiped my hand on my jeans and set the book on the bed. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I went around the cabin making sure windows were locked, curtains closed, lights on. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like the creeping sensation you get when someone tells a ghost story. Even though you don't believe in ghosts, your brain knows it isn't real, but your body reacts anyway. I went back to the bedroom and picked up the leather book. I opened it. The pages were swollen, water damaged, some stuck together. Most of what I saw at first were smudges, lines that had bled through in blue and black streaks. The first few pages didn't have any drawings or symbols, just ruined paper. Then I found a page where the writing survived well enough to read. The handwriting wasn't like the guestbook entries. It wasn't dramatic or big or erratic. It was tiny and careful, like someone writing only for themselves. I had to tilt the book toward the lamp just to make out the words. The first readable sentence said something like, "Found it near the lower bend of the river behind the fallen cedar." Then a few lines down, "Feels wrong to touch." Below that, "If it belongs to someone they should come get it, but no one ever comes close enough." There were no monsters, no threats, no jokes, just short observations, practical concerns, almost like a log. The more I read, the more uncomfortable I became. Whoever wrote it wasn't trying to scare anyone. They were documenting something that bothered them in a quiet, personal way. That felt more real than any monster rhyme. There was mention of hearing someone walking near the river at night, but never seeing them. Mention of finding footprints in the mud that didn't match the writer's shoe size or their partner's. Notes about missing firewood, missing tools, muddy handprints left on the back deck that didn't match either of them. Little things, all small, all explainable, but grouped together they formed a picture of someone growing more uneasy by the day. The last entry was only half a page because the rest of the paper had been torn out. The writing said, "Stayed awake last night listening. Not an animal. Steps too slow, too deliberate. Sounded like someone dragging their feet. Thought I saw someone standing at the river but disappeared when I turned on the light. Then, will check the trail in the morning." Then nothing. No date. No name. No ending. And the torn edge of the page looked ripped by hand, not cut. I closed the leather book slowly. I didn't know if the person who wrote this had simply left and taken the rest of the pages with them, or if something else had happened. Realistically, the something else was probably just a breakup, a fight, or someone forgetting the notebook entirely and someone else tearing out pages for scrap. People do weird things when they're living in remote places. You can't assume anything extreme. But sitting there with the rain hitting the roof and the river pounding outside, the whole cabin suddenly felt too isolated, too vulnerable. I checked the locks again, checked the deck, sat back down, unable to shake the idea that someone had once stayed here and felt watched, but not by something supernatural, just by someone who shouldn't have been this deep in the woods. That thought dug into me more than anything in the guest book. I tried distracting myself with a movie. I picked something stupid, something bright, the kind of movie I'd never watch on purpose under normal circumstances. But every now and then I'd pause the TV just to listen. The cabin made noises, wood popping, wind pushing against the siding, branches tapping the roof. But every time I muted the movie, I would wait for something else. Something heavier. Something like the footsteps the notebook described. Around midnight, I finally decided to go to sleep. I left the lamp on. I wasn't proud of that, but the cabin felt too dark without it. I tossed the leather book back into the basket, but I didn't bury it under the guides. I wanted to see it in the same spot in the morning, just to reassure myself that nothing had moved it. I slept lightly, waking up several times to check the time on my phone. I kept hearing the river, louder than usual, like the water level was rising. Maybe it was. It had been raining nonstop since late afternoon. At one point I thought I heard something else. Something like gravel shifting. But I forced myself not to get up, not to look out the window. When morning finally came, the light looked gray and washed out. I got dressed slowly, every movement stiff from a night of barely resting. I went straight to the basket. The leather book was exactly where I left it. What wasn't where I left it was the guest book. It wasn't on top of the stack anymore. It wasn't in the basket at all. I pulled everything out, shaking guides and flipping pages. Nothing. I searched the bedroom, the living room, the kitchen counter. Nothing. I hadn't touched it after throwing it into the basket the night before. The idea that I lost it didn't make sense. The cabin wasn't big enough to misplace something that size. I checked the front deck, then the back deck, then under the couch cushions. Still nothing. I stood in the middle of the living room and tried to calm myself down. The most logical explanation was simple: I misremembered where I put it. Maybe I left it on the bed and kicked it off. Maybe it fell behind something. Maybe I was overtired and spooking myself for no reason. But when I walked to the back deck one more time, just to reassure myself, I saw something that made my stomach drop. On the wet wood of the deck, right by the railing that faced the river, there were footprints. Bare footprints. Not huge, not deformed, not bloody. Nothing cinematic. Just the prints of someone's wet feet walking across the boards. They were small enough to be from someone lighter than me, but not so small they belonged to a kid. The prints started near the steps that led down to the trees. They walked straight toward the sliding glass door, and then they looped around and went back toward the stairs. None of the prints went inside. The door was still locked from the inside the way I left it. The footprints were fresh. Rain from the night had left everything soaked, but these impressions had a clear outline. The skin texture was visible, which meant someone had been on the deck recently. Very recently. That was it for me. I grabbed my bag, shoved everything inside, didn't bother folding anything. I checked the bedroom one more time and saw that the basket had been moved a few inches to the left. Maybe it was just me brushing past it earlier. Maybe not. Either way, I didn't want to stay long enough to confirm it. I locked the cabin door behind me, got in my car, and started driving back toward the highway. The road was muddy, narrow, and slick, but I didn't slow down more than necessary. When I finally saw the service road open up into the main road, I felt like I could breathe again. The whole way home I kept replaying everything in my head. Not the monster rhyme, not the symbols, not the frantic handwriting. What stuck with me was the leather book, the quiet entries about footsteps and missing things, and the footprints on the deck that matched the description too closely to ignore. Nothing supernatural happened. Nothing that defied logic. But that's what made it worse. Every detail pointed toward something very real, someone wandering that stretch of river, someone close enough to cabins to leave marks, someone comfortable enough to come up on the deck at night while people slept inside, someone who didn't want to be seen. When I got back to my apartment in Seattle, I unpacked my clothes and set my bag down. A faint damp smell drifted up from it. I thought it was just from the cabin, that wet wood scent that clings to everything. But then I reached into the side pocket, and my hand brushed against something wet. I pulled it out slowly. It was the leather book, the same one I had left on the bed that morning inside the cabin. I dropped it on the floor immediately. Water pooled around it like it had just been pulled from the river. I didn't open it again. I didn't call the cabin owner. I didn't drive back. I didn't ask anyone to check. I just left it exactly where it fell, in the middle of my apartment floor, because I knew one thing for certain: someone else had touched it after me. And they knew where I lived. I grew up thinking the woods were peaceful. My family always talked about trees and lakes like they were soothing, like they were a place you went when you needed a break from the noise of the world. I believed that for most of my childhood. But the older I get, the more I understand how wrong that was. The woods aren't peaceful. They're quiet. And quiet can hide anything. I was maybe 15 or 16 when this happened. Old enough to stay home alone. Old enough to think I knew what fear was. Young enough to be completely wrong. We were staying in this A-frame cabin in northern Washington. One of those sharp, roof places that look like they're meant to slide through piles of snow. Inside it felt wide open, because there were these huge windows facing the lake. No curtains, no blinds, just glass from waist height all the way up to the ceiling. During the day it felt amazing. At night, all that glass might as well have been nothing but holes in the wall. The cabin was right on a lake, a quiet one surrounded by heavy forest. The water was so still during the day that the reflections looked more solid than the real trees. My family had brought our small lake boat because the whole point of the trip was to get it in the water for the first time. The whole time we were out there together, things felt normal, comfortable. My mom and grandma lounged on the small deck. My dad and grandpa argued about which end of the dock needed fixing first. And I sat on the steps with my headphones in, feeling like life was easy. On the second day, my family decided they wanted snacks and drinks for the night. The nearest store was pretty far, 30 to 45 minutes down a narrow dirt road that always felt one wrong turn away from leaving you lost. When they said they were going, I told them I'd stay behind. I didn't feel like getting in the car. I wanted peace, maybe some music, maybe a nap. Nothing serious. They left, and at first everything felt exactly like I expected. I wandered around the cabin, switching songs, watching the sun drop behind the trees across the lake. Sunset through those huge windows was the best part of that place. The orange light hit the water in this perfect way that made everything look clean and warm. But the sun in Washington doesn't take long to disappear once it starts moving. It dipped behind the ridge, and the lake went from gold to silver to almost black. It was around then that I saw the movement near the bottom of the path. The dock sat about 100 meters down from the cabin, down a sloped trail that twisted between tall pines and thickets of brush. The light was so low by then that everything looked like silhouettes, and it would have been easy to miss any detail, but something moved. Not a big shift, not anything dramatic, just a small slow motion, like something stepping between two shadows. I told myself it was a deer, maybe even a moose. Washington has both, and this place was remote enough that large animals wandering near the water made sense. I didn't feel scared yet, just aware. The sun fully set a few minutes later, and that was when the cabin changed. All those windows that made the place feel open and inviting turned into black mirrors. The inside lights reflected everything back at me, and the moment I saw the faint reflection of my own face, I realized how exposed I was. Anyone, or anything, outside would have a perfect view of me. while I wouldn't be able to see them at all. I tried to ignore the feeling building in my chest. I walked down the hallway to use the bathroom, and the farther I got from the windows, the heavier the silence felt. It was the kind of silence that feels like it's pressing on your ears, like it's waiting for something. The moment I closed the bathroom door behind me, something inside me shifted. A kind of warning, like a low, constant hum telling me that something was wrong. I couldn't explain it. It was just there. The bathroom didn't have a window, which normally would have made me feel better. But for some reason it made everything worse. I stood there with this growing pressure in my chest, listening to the rain start to hit the roof in slow droplets. Each drop sounded too sharp, like it was marking time. I tried to finish what I was doing as quickly as possible, but my hands felt clumsy and the whole room felt tight, like it was shrinking. By the time I opened the bathroom door, my heartbeat felt louder than the rain. I walked fast down the hall and looked out at the windows, expecting to see the forest, the lake, maybe the outline of the dock if the moonlight hit right. Everything looked normal, empty. The forest was still, the lake had a flat shine from the moon, and the yard was quiet. But the feeling didn't go away. It actually got stronger. It hit me in a wave, the sense of being watched. Not the mild, paranoid kind. This was heavy. It was so strong it felt like hands on the back of my neck, cold and steady. Like someone standing just behind me, but not close enough to touch. I turned toward the hallway again, because something was telling me to look back there, and that was when I saw it. At the very end of the hallway was a clear glass door leading out to the side of the cabin. We used it earlier in the day to carry down towels and snacks for the boat. And standing on the other side of that door, lit faintly by the porch light, was a deer. But it wasn't standing like a deer. It was upright, balanced, its long neck angled toward the glass. Its front legs, arms, really, the way they hung, were resting close to its sides like it was trying to mimic the shape of a person. Its head was turned slightly, like it was studying me. The way its eyes reflected the hallway light didn't look natural. They didn't blink. They didn't shift. They just looked straight down the hall at me. My brain stopped working for a second. All I could do was stare. Every part of my mind screamed that this wasn't right, that this was dangerous. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My body stayed locked, waiting for something to happen. Then instinct kicked in. Not smart instinct, not calm thinking, just pure panic. I spun around and ran back into the bathroom. I shut the door as quietly as I could, locked it, and pressed my back against it. The bathroom felt even smaller now, like it was the last safe spot in the world. I tried to slow my breathing, but it came in sharp, shaky bursts, loud enough that I kept holding my breath just to keep quiet. I sat there for what felt like forever. Time didn't feel real. All I could hear was my own pulse and the soft, irregular taps of rain on the roof. I kept imagining footsteps outside the door, or the slow creak of the hallway floorboards, or the faint thud of something pressing against the glass. But nothing happened, just silence. Eventually I heard the sound of tires on gravel outside. My family's car. The slam of doors. Voices. Real normal voices. I stayed still for another full minute, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it, then unlocked the bathroom door and stepped out. The hallway was empty. The door at the end showed nothing outside but darkness and trees. No marks on the glass. No footprints on the deck or on the wet dirt near the steps. Nothing disturbed. The whole cabin looked untouched, like the last hour never happened. The next morning I checked everything again in daylight. The ground around the door was smooth. The yard was normal. No signs of animals. No deep hoof prints. Nothing that should have been there if a deer had stood that close. For years I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. Maybe I saw something reflected strangely in the glass. Maybe my mind twisted a normal deer's shape into something else. But every time I replay it, every time I picture that long body balanced upright, staring straight at me without moving, I know I didn't imagine it. Something was there. I still don't have an explanation. Maybe it was an injured animal acting strangely. Maybe it was some rare, freak behavior that I happened to witness at the wrong time, alone, in a house made of windows. Or maybe it was something people don't talk about, because it doesn't fit into the normal world. I don't pretend to know. But I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. And I know that ever since that night, I've never trusted the quiet of the woods the same way again. I always loved the Smoky Mountains, mostly because my parents treated them like a second home. Every year, sometimes twice a year, we drove up into those rolling green hills and stayed in different cabins around Pigeon Forge. Most of the trips blended together in my memory, just calm weekends, the smell of pine needles, my mom's coffee, my dad acting like he knew everything about the woods. But there was one trip that never blended with anything. It still sits in my mind like a bruise that never faded. It happened about 8 years ago, and even now, whenever I think about cabins or mountains or those long empty roads, my stomach tightens and my skin gets cold. We arrived at the cabin late in the evening. It was already fully dark, that kind of deep mountain darkness that feels heavier than normal night. I remember the cold air soaking through my jacket when I stepped out of the car, and the cabin windows glowing like they were trying too hard to look warm. This cabin was different from the ones we usually stayed in because it had a full security system. A keypad mounted near the front door, sensors on every door and window, and a panel that made loud beeps whenever someone opened anything. My parents liked the idea of extra security. I didn't think much of it at the time. Now, thinking back, I wish it never had that system because maybe I wouldn't have noticed half the things I did. We unpacked slowly, dragging our bags inside and spreading out through the cabin like we always did. My dad claimed the basement room because he snored so loudly that the walls almost shook. I stayed on the main floor near the kitchen. My mom slept up in the loft bedroom, which overlooked the living room and had its own small staircase. The place felt normal enough at first, a little too quiet, maybe. The woods pressed right up to the back deck, and the hot tub sat out there steaming in the cold air. Everything smelled like old wood and cleaning spray. We set the alarm system before settling down to watch a movie. The cabin felt sealed, locked safe. I sat on the couch with a blanket across my legs. My mom had dimmed the lights so the room looked soft and golden. About halfway through the movie, the alarm exploded with noise. It was one sharp, violent blast. Not the beeping sound it made when you disarmed it. It was the full burglar alarm siren, echoing through the wooden walls. It only triggered if a door opened. We jumped up fast. My dad punched the code into the keypad and silenced it. Then we searched the entire cabin from top to bottom. Every room, every closet under every bed. The basement, the loft, the deck, everything. Nothing was open, nothing was broken, no wind drafts, no signs of anything. I tried to calm myself, telling myself alarms malfunction, wires loosen, sensors glitch. I forced myself to sit down and try to finish the movie. But my heart never fully settled after that. It felt like something had shifted in the air around us, like the cabin wasn't just empty walls and wooden floors anymore. It felt aware. The next morning my dad called the rental company and asked them to send someone out. A repair guy arrived shortly after lunch. I remember him brushing snow off his jacket as he stepped inside. He walked straight to the panel and started messing with wires. He kept shaking his head and sighing. Later, my dad told us that the man admitted he had already been called to the same cabin multiple times in the past month for the exact same type of alarm problem. That alone made me uneasy. Not supernatural uneasy, just human uneasy. Alarms don't go off for no reason, not repeatedly. I tried to distract myself and wandered around the living room. That's when I noticed the guest book sitting on the coffee table. It looked like something the cabin owners left out so visitors could write little cute messages about the great views, the comfortable beds, the hot tub, all the usual stuff. I expected cheerful notes. Instead, the longer I flipped through the pages, the more my stomach started to churn. People kept mentioning strange things, feeling unsafe, hearing footsteps at night, waking up to wet footprints around the hot tub even when no one had used it. Some said they cut their trips short because they felt watched. I kept reading even when I wanted to stop. It wasn't the kind of writing people did for fun. The details weren't dramatic or overblown. They were too plain, too consistent across different months and seasons and guests. But I forced myself to push it out of my mind. I didn't want to ruin our trip, and I didn't want to be the one who made everyone paranoid. So I closed the book and pretended it was nothing. That night, everything felt normal again when we went to bed. My dad headed downstairs, my mom climbed up the loft stairs, and I crawled under my blankets on the main floor. The cabin had this low hum from the heater, and every once in a while the wooden beams creaked, as if they were settling. I felt tired enough that I expected to fall asleep fast, but I remember staring at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the quiet. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of the fridge door closing. Not slamming, just a soft, dull thump, like someone easing it shut with one hand. The fridge was only a few steps from my bedroom door. The crack under my door glowed with a bright white rectangle of refrigerator light. The light flickered twice as if the door was being opened and closed again. I didn't feel curious. I didn't feel hungry or annoyed. I felt uneasy. Something about the way the door kept opening and closing made me feel frozen in place. I told myself it was one of my parents. Maybe one of them had woken up thirsty or wanted a snack. That explanation seemed normal enough, so I stayed in bed, stiff and silent. The fridge light finally disappeared after a few seconds. Then I heard footsteps move away from my door. Slow, steady footsteps, crossing the kitchen floor. They reached the bottom of the stairs that led to the loft. They paused there, just long enough to make the hair on my arms rise. Then I heard the steps start going up. A few creaks, a rhythm, like someone placing their full weight on each stair. The sound stopped suddenly, halfway up. Just stopped. No movement. No shifting. Nothing at all. I waited for my mom's usual movements, the small thud of her walking across the loft, the sound of her bed shifting, but nothing happened. Just silence again. Eventually, my body let go of its tension and I fell back asleep. In the morning, everything looked normal. Sunlight came through the cabin windows and snow on the deck sparkled. But I felt sick, like something had crawled into my gut overnight. I went upstairs immediately, looking for answers, expecting to hear that one of my parents had been digging through the fridge. But it turned out neither of them had. My mom had seen someone on the stairs. I had heard someone on the stairs. Neither of us had been awake. Neither of us had been in the kitchen. For the rest of the trip I stayed upstairs with her. I refused to sleep on the main floor again. I didn't say much about what I felt. I didn't want to start a panic or ruin the week. But every night I lay awake listening to every small shift in the cabin, every creak, every vibration in the floorboards. I kept looking at the loft stairs in the dark, waiting for something to appear or move or breathe. Nothing else happened, but that didn't make me feel safer. It made everything feel like it was holding its breath. We left at the end of the week. I remember the relief I felt when the cabin disappeared behind us through the trees, like stepping out of a pressure chamber. I tried to convince myself I had overreacted. I tried to convince myself it was all sleep confusion and misinterpretation. Then a couple months later, my dad told me he tried to look up the cabin for another trip. It had been shut down, completely removed from the rental listings. He looked deeper and found out that a lot of guests had complained about the same things we experienced. Feelings of being watched, strange footsteps, sounds in the kitchen at night, people leaving early, refusing to stay another night, asking for refunds. No ghost stories, no monsters, Just people feeling unsafe. People sensing someone inside the cabin who shouldn't be there. Something human. Something real. Whatever happened that night wasn't supernatural. It wasn't a shadow or a spirit or anything from stories. It was something we didn't see. Something we didn't catch. Someone who had access, or someone who hid, or someone who came and went without setting off alarms the right way. Something that could move through a cabin quietly and stand at the bottom of a staircase before climbing halfway and stopping. The cabin being shut down confirmed everything I already felt. Something was wrong there. Not in a fantasy way, but in a way that makes you close every window at night and double check locks and sleep lightly for years afterward. I still don't know what I heard that night. I still don't know who stood on those stairs. But I know it was real. And because it was real, it was worse than any story or legend. Something human had been moving around in that cabin, and we stayed there thinking we were alone. The ending to that trip never settled in my mind as a mystery. It settled as a warning. If something feels wrong, if something feels off, it probably is. And sometimes the scariest things are the ones that don't need any explanation at all. The ones that were already inside the house with you, moving in the dark while you slept. I arrived at the cabin already tired from the winding drive through the Gold Coast mountains, and the moment I stepped out of the car, something in my chest tightened. The air felt heavy, like the weight you feel before a storm, but the sky was clear. My friends got out behind me, trying to joke about the cold, but everyone's voice sounded flat, like none of us had the energy to pretend we were excited for the weekend. The cabin looked older than the photos online. Wood-worn, almost gray, the porch sagging slightly at one corner, windows clouded from age. The listing said it was around 100 years old, but standing in front of it, it looked even older, like something that had been left behind by time and patched together enough to keep it standing. Inside, the air was stale and cold, not musty exactly, just heavy and unmoving. It hit me right away. I felt unsettled, moody for no reason, and drained in a way that made no sense. All of us felt it. Everyone got quiet. No one said it out loud, but I could see it in their faces. Something was off. The interior was worse. Every wall had something strange on it, scissors nailed in patterns, old rusted nails sticking out of boards used as decoration, chipped masks with faces that seemed twisted or distorted, rosaries draped over nails as if someone had hung them in a hurry. There was even a wooden heart on one wall with long nails driven straight through it, the metal rusted and dark. It didn't look like decor. It looked like warnings. We tried to settle in. Dinner, unpacking, pretending everything was normal. But when we tried to sleep, two of us couldn't. I was one of them. I kept feeling watched. Not just uneasy, actually watched, like someone was standing a few steps behind me the entire time. The downstairs area had a small lobby between the front door and the living room, and we kept glancing toward it, expecting to see someone there. We were sitting on the couch, wide awake even though it was almost midnight, when it happened. The door that connected the living room to the little lobby suddenly crashed inward so hard that it shook on its hinges. It wasn't like someone pushed it. It was a full hit, like something slammed into it with its whole weight. The sound was so loud it went through my chest. The whole door rattled, wooden frame creaking, like it barely held itself together. We froze. I felt the couch vibrate under me from the force. For a long moment, we didn't move. Nothing else happened. When we finally checked, there was nothing there. No wind. No animals. The front door was closed and locked. The lobby was empty. The air felt even heavier after that, like the whole cabin tightened around us. The next night, we tried to explain it to the others. They had slept through it somehow, and we were on the deck overlooking the forest, trying to recreate the sound. We hit the wall lightly at first, then harder, 3 times, trying to match the force of the bang. Right after the third hit, 3 loud thuds sounded from the far corner of the balcony. Not echoes, not us hitting anything. Actual steps or impacts spaced out, deliberate. Then a spare chair on the deck scraped across the wooden boards. We froze again, all of us looking at the chair. It moved just a few inches, but enough to hear the dragging. That was when everyone agreed something wasn't right. We decided to drag a mattress into one bedroom so we could all sleep together. We didn't even talk about it. It was just something we all knew we needed to do. Sleeping alone didn't feel safe. The room itself felt strange, the air warmer than the rest of the house, and the walls holding heat like they were alive. When 3 of us were up there arranging the mattress, the window on the far side slammed shut with such force that the glass shook. No wind, no draft, no reason for it. It was already closed, but somehow it slammed tighter, like someone had shoved it. That night, after we finally got into bed, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept replaying every sound in my head, waiting for something else to happen. At around 3 in the morning, I noticed movement on the window. Not inside, outside. A shadow sliding across it, slow and smooth. I didn't feel brave. I felt sick with fear. But I lifted my phone and started recording, because my brain was telling me that if something happened and I didn't film it, I'd think I imagined everything later. In the video, about 10 seconds in, something white slides into frame. A shape. A figure. It moves in, then back out just as quickly. At the moment, I didn't check the video. I didn't want to know. I kept my head down, pretending to sleep, until exhaustion finally pulled me under. At 6 in the morning, I woke up instantly, like someone had snapped their fingers. I opened my eyes and saw a man standing at the end of the bed. He wasn't see-through or glowing or anything like that. He looked solid. He looked real. He wore a skirt made of red, black, and white fabric, and the same colors crossed over his chest like a sash. He held a spear in one hand, and his expression was deep, angry, like he was furious we were there. I thought he was the owner, or someone who lived nearby, someone who had found us asleep, and was angry we were in his space. My whole body burned with panic. I tried to sit up, but my limbs felt heavy. I nudged the friend next to me, not speaking, just trying to make her aware. When she opened her eyes, she didn't react. She didn't see him. I turned back, and he was gone. No sound, no movement, nothing. The nausea hit almost instantly. A deep, rolling sickness that felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I could barely breathe. I told my friend we needed to leave. Now, she didn't argue. We packed everything in silence, everyone pale and exhausted, no one asking questions because we were all thinking the same thing: we needed to get out. The moment we drove about a kilometer down the road, everything lifted. The nausea vanished. My head cleared. My chest loosened like someone had been pressing down on it and finally let go. Everyone in the car looked different, like color had returned to our faces. When I finally looked at the video later that afternoon, the figure in the frame wasn't vague or blurry. It was a face. Clear, white, watching. Not distorted, not misty. Just there. Like someone was standing outside staring in. I still don't know how to explain any of it. I don't believe in ghosts, and I don't believe in stories that sound made up or dramatic. But everything that happened in that cabin was real. Every sound, every movement, the heaviness in the air, the man at the end of the bed. It was all real. The only thing I'm certain of now is that whatever was in that cabin didn't want us there, and the moment we left its space, it let us go. I've stayed in plenty of old places before, but I've never felt anything like that, and I don't ever plan on going back to those mountains again. I grew up hearing the same story from my dad every few years, always told in the same slow way. Always with that strange quiet look on his face that didn't match the way he usually talked about anything from his past. My dad isn't the type of man who scares easily. He grew up working on a farm, spent years as a firefighter, saw accidents, saw blood, saw things that would make most people sick. He was raised in a strict religious home, never believed in ghosts, never believed in anything supernatural. He always brushed off any strange story someone tried to tell him. Yet, whenever this particular memory came up, his whole expression changed. His voice would get low, and he would stare at the floor for a long moment before he spoke again. I never saw him do that about anything else. He always warned me that the woods behind our farm stretched farther than they looked. The land rolled and dipped in ways that didn't make sense until you walked it yourself. Behind the waterfall and creek bed was an area the family used all the time, and my dad and his friends practically lived out there when they were teenagers. They knew every stump, every curve in the trail, every patch of briars, every area where the land sloped into soft mud. The roads were second nature to them. But the night he always talked about was the night they decided to cut behind another farmer's property. The group used to sneak that way sometimes, mostly to look at the strange animals that farmer kept. Emus, big birds with long legs, odd pets for the area. My dad said it always felt like they were walking into someone's private little world when they went there. But they were young, and curiosity always won. It was late in the evening when they crossed into those woods. The kind of night when the air feels heavier than usual, when the wind doesn't blow, and everything sounds louder simply because nothing is moving. They followed a dim path that wasn't really a trail, just a worn line of flattened grass, and kept walking deeper, until even the sound of the creek faded behind them. They were talking to each other in low voices, mostly joking with one another about the cold and about how dark it was. They never felt the need to be careful. They knew these woods better than the roads near town. My dad said it happened fast. One moment they were pushing through brush, and the next moment a shape appeared through the trees. A house. Not a cabin like the ones built by hunters. This one looked like a small old cottage, the kind that might have been built before the interstate came through. It had sharp corners, a strange slanted porch roof, wood siding that had rotted in long streaks, and a circular window on the second floor that almost looked like an eye staring out at them. They never expected to find anything like that in the woods, especially in a place they thought they knew completely. The sight of it made my dad stop walking without really meaning to. He said the house didn't feel abandoned in the way old farmhouses do when they sag into the ground. It looked abandoned, but it also looked disturbed, like someone had lived there long after it stopped being safe. He couldn't explain it well, but he said the shape of the place made his stomach tighten. It stood crooked, leaning slightly to the right, but still holding itself upright, as if something inside was keeping it from collapsing all the way. They pushed forward anyway, because they were young and stupid, and because an unexplored building in the woods was something they couldn't just walk away from. The front door was partly open, and inside was a small living area connected to a kitchen. The first thing they noticed was the writing. It covered almost every wall they could see. Some of it looked like English words written by someone who didn't care how they looked. Other writing was curved and sharp, shapes that looked like a mix of made-up symbols and bits of Latin. Some had been written in spray paint, and some looked darker and older. My dad said he had seen dried blood enough times to know how it stains wood. He believed some of the markings were done that way. The floor had deep scratches, like someone had dragged heavy metal furniture across it over and over. Dust covered everything. No footprints except for the ones they made. The air felt wrong, heavy with the smell of rot mixed with old wood. Sunlight didn't reach that area of the woods easily, so the light inside came from the soft glow of the moon slipping through the broken boards. Past the living room was the staircase. My dad described it as so narrow that he had to turn slightly sideways to walk up. The walls were close enough that his shoulders brushed them. The stairs went up only a few feet before turning sharply at a landing. You couldn't see what was waiting at the top until you were already halfway up. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He said it felt like walking into a tunnel. At the top was the attic room. The moment they stepped inside, they realized that the writing upstairs was far worse than downstairs. The walls were covered in larger symbols. Some were painted in bright colors, others scratched into the wood itself. Along one wall hung heavy chain manacles, the kind someone would use to hold an animal or a person in place. One chain was long enough that it dragged across the floor, leaving a dark trail in the dust. On the floor were dark stains, larger ones than downstairs, dried into the wood. The room had a circular window at the end, the same one they had seen from outside. They walked slowly around the room, stepping over old boards that felt soft under their weight. My dad said that when he looked at the walls too long, he felt a kind of pressure in his head, like someone was standing too close behind him, even though he knew no one was there. The air in the attic felt hotter, stale in a way that made the back of his throat itch. He didn't like the circular window, either. It cast a pale light that made the uneven floor look warped, like it dipped and curved even if it didn't actually move. At some point he heard something behind him. He said it sounded sharp, like something tapping rapidly on wood, a pattern that reminded him of hard shoes moving uphill. He turned quickly, expecting one of his friends to be there, but the stairwell was empty. Dust covered every step clearly. Only their own tracks were visible. The sound had echoed up the walls and stopped instantly the moment they turned. That was the first time he admitted he felt real fear. They decided to go back down and check the lower floor again, thinking maybe someone had followed them inside or someone was hiding in the shadows below. But after checking every corner, every spot behind broken furniture, and every dark space where something could hide, they found nothing. The air felt even thicker, like the heat in the attic had followed them down. My dad said he felt a mild nausea creeping in, something like the early stages of a fever. They walked outside and tried to shake off the feeling, but they weren't done. For reasons none of them could explain later, they all decided to test something. They wanted to see if they could approach the house again from another direction. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe they simply wanted to prove they still understood their own woods. They took out a compass, picked a direction, and walked away from the building. They kept walking until the house was completely out of sight behind the trees. Then they turned and tried to approach it from the east. They walked in a perfectly straight line. My dad said they paid attention to every step, making sure they didn't drift south. Eventually the building should have been on their right. Instead they came out directly in front of the house again. Not close to it from the side, not at an angle, but standing at the front door exactly as before. They tried again, and again. 10 times in total. They walked incredibly far in some of those attempts, farther than necessary, trying every combination of direction. But every single time they returned to the front. My dad said it felt like something in the woods was pushing them into a circle they couldn't feel under their feet. But he never claimed anything supernatural. He thought maybe the land was shaped strangely, or the darkness made their sense of direction collapse. But the compass readings didn't make sense. They followed them perfectly, yet none of it lined up. By the last attempt, they were all feeling sick. My dad said he felt a pounding in his temple, the kind that makes your vision pulse. One of the others was bent over, breathing hard, looking gray in the face. They turned to leave for good. But before they walked away, the one who had nearly fainted looked up at the circular window. My dad said he saw the figure the moment he looked too. A tall woman, not a ghost, not a creature. A person, someone who had been living in that house. Her back was hunched in a way that made her height look wrong, like she had spent years walking in small spaces. Her clothes were dark and loose, hanging off her like old curtains. Her eyes looked almost black from the distance, not glowing or supernatural, just deep, empty, and unfocused. Her face was pale in the dim light, her hair long and messy, hanging forward like she hadn't cared for it in years. She wasn't standing still. She shifted her weight slowly from one side to the other, like someone whose joints didn't move normally anymore. Then she turned and walked away from the window, disappearing into the shadows of the room. The moment she moved, they all ran. None of them stopped to think. None of them looked back until the woods thinned near the interstate. They ran until their lungs burned. My dad said he could feel the rush of cold air cutting through the heat in his body, and every step felt lighter the farther they got from the house. They pushed through brambles and low branches, scratched their arms and legs on thorns, stumbled over rocks, and didn't care. They didn't slow down until the glow of the interstate lights reached them. Once they reached the road, they hurried along it back toward home. Later that night, when they finally reached the house, they tried to calm down. But every small noise outside made them uneasy. The woods behind the house looked darker than usual. My dad's cousin went into the kitchen to get water and came back pale as a sheet. He said he thought he saw someone standing at the edge of the woods near the shed, a tall shape that didn't move. My dad always insisted that it was probably just his cousin's fear playing tricks on him, because none of them slept well that night and their nerves were shot. But he could never deny how badly it scared him to think about. Years later, when they returned to see the house again, they found it collapsed into a heap of rotted boards and rusted nails. The circular window frame lay crushed among the debris. The stairs were under a mound of broken walls. The attic roof had caved in on itself. Whatever life the house once held had finally ended. There was nothing left to see. I used to joke with my dad, asking what he would do if he walked back out there one day and found the house standing again, untouched, as if nothing had happened. He never laughed at that. He only shook his head slowly, like the question itself made his skin crawl in a way he didn't want to explain. As I got older, the story stayed with me. It wasn't the house or the symbols or even the chains on the wall that affected me the most. It was the consistency of the story. 5 grown men, interviewed years apart, describing every detail the same way. None of them were storytellers. None of them liked exaggerating. And none of them ever wanted to talk about that night unless someone forced them to. They never claimed anything supernatural. They never used words like ghost or spirit. They believed what they saw was real in the most human way possible. A house used by someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Someone who might have done terrible things inside. Someone who became part of the woods the way abandoned places sometimes do, where isolation changes people slowly and quietly. Someone who returned to the upstairs window the moment they thought they were alone. When I think about the story now, I don't imagine anything unnatural. I imagine a person who hid in that attic, living off the land, growing stranger and more reclusive over time, writing on the walls, leaving the stains that never washed away, and stepping silently through the house, in a way that confused anyone who tried to track them. A person who saw 5 teenagers walk into their space and watched them from the shadows, waiting for them to leave. What scares me isn't that they saw a figure in the window. What scares me is that the figure was real, and she might have been standing only a few feet behind them the entire time. I got 2 months of paid leave from my job, though it never felt like a reward. It felt more like a push out the door. I had been falling apart for months, barely eating, barely sleeping, dragging myself through work like a ghost. Everyone could see it. I think my boss hoped that if I disappeared for a while, I might come back as a functional person again. I wasn't sure I would. I wasn't even sure I wanted to. My life had collapsed in slow motion, one crack at a time, and when my ex finally told me to pack my bags and get out, the last piece holding me together snapped. I ended up in a basement apartment my friend Bob owned, A place where the pipes moaned all night, and the carpet smelled like cold dirt. But it was cheap and quiet, and for a while that was enough. When he offered to sublet it while I took time away, that sealed the deal. I didn't need anything pulling me back. I wanted a place away from everyone, away from noise, away from responsibility, away from reminders of the mess my life had become. My family had a cabin far north, miles from the nearest town, sitting by a lake that barely anyone visited. I hadn't been there in years because my ex hated it. No plumbing, no electricity, no services. Back then I went along with her dislike of it. But deep down I always missed the quiet there. So when this leave started, the cabin felt like the only place left to hide. Before I drove up, I contacted my sister. She had been taking care of the place for years now, checking on it every few months, replacing shingles, cleaning the gutters, keeping the place from falling in on itself. She was oddly excited that I wanted to stay there. She warned me that the drive might be rough, because the roads up north were worse than ever. She said she would be around if I needed anything. That gave me some comfort, although I didn't want company. I just wanted space. The drive was exhausting. The farther north I went, the more the pavement cracked and broke apart. The forest swallowed the sky. Cell reception faded in and out until it was gone completely. The wheel vibrated in my hands from the rough roads, and halfway there I hit a deep pothole and blew a tire. My heart sank when I saw the shredded rubber hanging off the rim. I replaced it with the spare, but the spare was so worn it might as well have been made of cardboard. I drove the rest of the way nursing it like a wounded animal, creeping along at a speed slow enough to make me sweat through my shirt. The thought of getting stranded out there made my stomach twist. When I finally reached the cabin, the sun was sinking. The place looked smaller than I remembered. It sat low to the ground, its frame bent slightly, the wood darkened by decades of storms. The lake behind it was smooth and silent, like a giant piece of glass. A tire swing hung from an old oak near the shoreline, swaying gently in the evening breeze. It pulled up memories I hadn't thought about in years. My dad pushing me so hard I felt weightless, the smell of lake water on the wind, the simple joy before everything in life became complicated. Inside, the cabin felt tight and stale. The air smelled like old wood and dust. The floor creaked with every step. I lit the kerosene lamp that sat on the kitchen table, and its soft yellow glow made the place feel smaller. I set my phone and laptop to charge on the inverter my sister had installed. The battery hummed quietly, the only sign of modern life inside the cabin. I sat on the old couch that dipped in the middle and listened to the sounds outside. The call of coyotes carried through the woods. The lake water sloshed against the rocks. Branches clicked in the wind. Even with all that sound, the place felt too quiet, like there was something waiting in the spaces between those noises. I tried to relax, but my nerves were stretched tight. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe it was the memory of the divorce still weighing on me. I stared at the family portrait hanging near the fireplace. The sight of my dad holding his fishing rod, Mom smiling with tired eyes, my sister covered in dark eyeliner during her teenage phase, and me, with my awkward glasses and crooked posture, made my chest ache. Life had been simpler when that photo was taken, even though I never realized it at the time. I drank whiskey from the bottle, letting the burn settle through my chest. It made the room feel softer, warmer. I threw wood into the fireplace until the flames filled the cabin with a dry heat. Eventually, my body relaxed into the couch, and my eyes grew heavy. I must have drifted off, because something woke me. A dull thump. A small scrape. I sat up too fast, head spinning, heart pounding. I listened for more sounds, but everything was still. I walked through the cabin, checking corners, looking out windows, trying to make sense of what I heard. Nothing. When the cold outside air drifted through a crack, I felt a different kind of unease, something I couldn't explain in any logical way. I went outside with my phone flashlight and walked toward the outhouse. The dirt felt cold under my feet. The woods felt too close. The outhouse door let out a long groan when I opened it. Inside, the smell hit me with a wave that forced me to cover my mouth. As I stepped inside, something fluttered violently above my head. I felt claws snag my scalp. A bat flapped around, smashing into the side of the outhouse, brushing my hair again and again. I panicked and stumbled backward, almost falling into the hole. My stomach turned at the thought. When the bat finally flew out, my legs were trembling. I hurried back to the cabin, changed my clothes, cleaned the blood from the scratches in my hair, and tried to calm myself. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I checked the car next, wanting to leave right away. The spare tire had flattened during the night. The car leaned toward one side like it was surrendering. I knew then that I wasn't leaving for a while. I stood there in the dark, staring at the car, feeling the panic crawl higher inside my chest. In the morning, the light made everything look normal again. That helped a little. I made coffee and sat outside on the deck, letting the cold air wake me fully. My computer sat on the table, the blinking cursor waiting for me to write something. The novel idea I had, about the cheating wife and the serial killer twist, had been the one thing that kept me going through the divorce. I opened the file and started typing. The writing distracted me for a while. It made me forget about the night before, the flat tire, the panic. I wrote until my back hurt and my eyes burned. When I finally stepped outside again, I felt watched. I couldn't explain why. The trees stood still. The lake rippled in the breeze. My nerves were already worn thin, so maybe that was all it was. I told myself that over and over. My mind had gone into survival mode, making threats out of harmless things. By noon, clouds gathered, thick and gray. I grilled a few hot dogs outside, though my hands felt unsteady each time the wind blew. A chipmunk ran over my foot and scared me badly enough that I almost dropped the hot dogs into the dirt. My nerves were shot. Everything made me jump. As I stood there, I realized how alone I truly was. No cell reception. A useless car. A long stretch of forest. No one nearby who could hear if something went wrong. The shed behind the cabin had changed since I last saw it. My sister had filled it with things I couldn't understand. Strange containers. Old decorations. Boxes of props she said she used for gatherings. Nothing harmful on its own, but the way it was arranged made me uneasy. Everything felt out of place, thrown together without care. The shed smelled musty, like damp wood and mildew. I didn't stay long inside it. Later that afternoon, a storm rolled in. The rain came down hard, thundering on the cabin roof. The wind shook the windows. I wrote until the storm quieted, then stepped outside again to get some air. That was when the tension I had been ignoring sharpened into something painful. I felt it instantly, a strong instinct telling me that I shouldn't be outside, that the woods were too still, that something had shifted in the atmosphere. My body reacted before my brain could explain anything. My chest tightened. My tongue felt dry. I took a step back toward the cabin, then another. I didn't see the branch until I tripped on it and slammed onto the ground. My shoulder snapped with pain. Something scraped my leg. I scrambled to stand, but the ground was slippery from the rain and mud. I slid and rolled until I hit the base of a fallen tree. The bark tore into my skin. My head smacked the root and everything went blurry. I don't remember much after that except the cold mud against my cheek and a long ringing sound in my ears. When I woke up again, I was lying in the wet grass. Someone was shaking my shoulder gently. I opened my eyes and saw my sister above me. Her face looked thinner than I remembered. Her eyes were sunken with worry. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. She pulled me up slowly and guided me toward the lake, so she could rinse the mud and blood off me. I was so dazed I could barely stand. My whole body throbbed. She told me I had texted her the night before asking for a tire. She had driven up early in the morning and found me lying outside near the fallen tree. She said it looked like I slipped while walking in the storm. She said I must have hit my head harder than I realized. She didn't mention anything strange. She looked around the woods a few times as if expecting something, but she didn't say what. When I looked around too, the forest looked normal again. The same tall trees. The same light moving between branches. Nothing unusual. Nothing threatening. Nothing to explain the fear that still pulsed through me. Maybe the isolation had messed with me more than I thought. Maybe the accident knocked my brain out of place for a while. Maybe the stress, the divorce, the loneliness, the exhaustion from the drive, all of it had compounded until I couldn't trust my own instincts. My sister replaced my tire while I packed my things. My hands shook every time I folded a shirt or zipped a bag. Both of us moved quickly, neither of us wanting to stay any longer than needed. Before leaving, I grabbed some kindling and lit a fire in the pit near the cabin. I watched the flames catch the dry wood. I didn't say anything, but the feeling was clear in my chest. I didn't want to come back here again. Not after how quickly my mind had unraveled in this place. Not after how easily my fear had taken control. We drove back south together. She stayed quiet for most of the ride, glancing at me every few minutes to make sure I wasn't slipping in and out of consciousness. I stared out the window at the trees passing by, each one blending into the next. They looked ordinary, but something inside me stayed tense until we were far from the lake. I spent the summer living in her basement, sleeping on a mattress that sagged, spending most days writing. The solitude felt safer when walls surrounded me and neighbors existed on the other side of them. The novel came along better than I expected. Maybe the fear sharpened something in me. Maybe being close to the edge made the writing more real. I finished almost the entire thing before the end of the leave. Sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I still see the cabin. I see the lake behind it. I see the dark path leading to the outhouse. I hear the wind moving through the trees. But I don't imagine anything strange. I don't add ghosts or magic or anything out of this world. The truth is frightening enough. Being alone, being isolated, being unsure of your own mind, that's more than enough to break someone. I survived that summer, but I left knowing that solitude isn't always healing. Sometimes it exposes every crack in your life, making them wider until everything threatens to fall apart. I still write, and the story of that trip became something I never expected. I changed the names, added distance between myself and the real memories, softened the edges where I needed to. But the heart of it stayed the same. And whenever someone asks me why I don't go up north anymore, I simply say that some places are better left to time and memory, because not every quiet place is safe, and not every retreat brings peace. Sometimes the world outside is harmless, and the danger is already inside you, waiting for the right moment to surface.